Welcome to the High Adventure Scouting Podcast. This is the source for all things high adventure for scouts, scouters, and anyone else interested in promoting high adventure trips for our youth. You can find all kinds of great high adventure options for your scouts at highadventurescouting.com. We are constantly updating the list of cool trips, and we want your input on your best trip.
Welcome, high adventure enthusiasts. We're excited, as always, to highlight a high adventure base on this edition of the High Adventure Scouting Podcast. Today, we are joined by Stephen Miller, Program Director for Montana High Adventure Base, or better known as MOHAB. MOHAB is located near the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana. MOHAB is operated by the Montana Council, the Boy Scouts of America, in partnership with the Boone and Crockett Club. Stephen, thanks for joining us today on the High Adventure Scouting Podcast.
Yeah, no problem, Rob. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Now, the purpose of this podcast is to give the listeners a little more information about your program offerings. Now, I'm sure many outside the regional area where you're located don't know much about your program. So we're just kind of jump in and kind of see how things are up in Montana. So tell me a little bit about your programs, kind of what the things you offer, and we'll kind of go from there.
Totally. Yeah. So MOHAB is kind of a new scouting camp. We've been around for about 6 years. I've actually been with the program the entire time that they've been running in Montana. And we're also kind of small, so that may be why you haven't heard about us. But we're based out of DePoyer, Montana, with the Boone and Crockett, like Rob said. And we take 1 and 2 week treks into the Bob Marshall Wilderness. We do trekking, but we also do pack rafting, which is kind of like our premier, the highlight, the thing that people really get interested with us about. And a pack raft is an inflatable kayak. It weighs about 8 pounds with a life vest and a helmet, and a paddle. It weighs about 10. We put those in our backpacks, and then we go out into the Bob Marshall Wilderness for 1 or 2 weeks, depending on what you want to do for your trip. And we do a mix of pack rafting and trekking. So what that'll look like is you'll hike to a river, you'll float, 10 or 15 miles one day. You'll get out of the river. You might hike to another river system. You might hike to a lake or a day hike or climb a peak. And we just take treks like that into the Bob Marshall. The Bob Marshall's the second largest wilderness area in the United States after the Frank Church in Idaho. It's a huge, vast, remote place. And our property backs up right to the wilderness. So we have an awesome entry point. And when you come with your troop, you kind of have 1 million acres to work with. And to go wherever you want, just depending on where the rivers are and what you want to do.
Well, I'm sold already. That sounds really cool. and like we talked before we started the program is, we looked at this, your option a couple years ago when our Belmont trek was canceled. And we were excited that one day we'd like to go there. So it looks like an awesome place. Now, you said that you go to 1 to 2 week treks. Now, are the treks set up ahead of time, or is that something that the troop or crew will set up when they get there and kind of determine that? Or how
that's a great question. So one of the things that's really important to us at MOHAB is that it's a boy-led program. So much like you'll hear in scouting, and with a lot of other high adventure treks, it's especially important in MOHAB, but we want the scouts, the participants, not the adults, to be leading this trek. So you'll get to MOHAB on a Sunday. You'll have dinner with us and learn about what we do at the Boone and Crockett and at our base camp. And then for the next 2 days, you go into packing and planning mode. So we give you kind of a rough template of where we think you could go, what we think would be an interesting route for you. but then our participants plan the route entirely. They pick where they're going to start, they pick where they're going to end, they pick what they're going to be doing every day on the trail. And they're kind of just following loose guidelines depending on what the rivers are doing. Like if you're earlier in the season, you might be floating on some rivers. If it's later in the season, we'll move to other rivers because the water's going down and stuff. And our program is really focused on pack rafting. But that is one really important thing about MOHAB. We let you design your own trek. And like I said earlier, we have 1 million acres to work with. So there's a lot of different places you can go in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And we have a ton of different options for our 2-week trek. We're on the trail for 12 days. And this last one that I did this last summer, we actually did 115 miles by river and foot.
Holy cow, that's awesome.
So yeah, to wrap that kind of question up, I guess we have some rough options and some routes that people have done before, but we really focus on letting you plan your trek and you picking what you want to do.
Awesome. Now, on those treks, is there are they kind of on their own, or do they, like some of the other high adventure bases, do they have a staff member with them for the whole time, part of the time? What's the layout of that?
Yeah, so we have 3 guides that go with you the whole time. Unlike Philmont or some of the other high adventure base that have like staff camps and staff program and stuff, we're more similar to Northern Tier. We're going into a wilderness area. So we'll send 2 or 3 guides, depending on how big your crew is, and they'll accompany you during your whole trek. But when you're on your trek, you're doing just that. You're rafting, you're trekking. You're not really doing like spar pulling or some activity like that because we're in a wilderness area, right? And there isn't stuff like that.
Exactly. Okay. Well, that's cool. Yeah, we took a crew to Northern Tier this past summer, and we had one guide with us pretty much the whole time, and it was neat to have somebody who knew. Nobody in our crew had been on a canoe trip up in the Boundary Water, so that's neat to have a guide on that. So
totally,
now,
yeah. Sorry, but it's
right.
We send 3 guides with you just because we'll be doing a lot of whitewater rafting and like in a really remote area. So it's nice to have a couple hands on deck who know the area and are familiar with all the topography and maps and rivers and stuff. Because the Bob can be a really big and remote place, and if you haven't been there before, it can be kind of intimidating. So it helps to have a couple staff members going with you. I'm sure you experienced that in Northern Tier as well. That's such a huge wilderness area. You kind of need a guide.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Unless you've been there before and you know where it's at. So that's, and I've looked at the maps, Bob Marshall. I've not been up there, but that's a massive area, like you said. So,
it's huge.
I'm real curious about these rafts. You indicated that they will kind of deflate and you kind of carry them with you when you're going across land. Is that kind of a 1-person outfit, 2-person? What's the layout of those rafts?
Yeah, so everyone gets their own raft. It's a 1-person raft, and you can think of it basically as a kayak that goes on your back, and that weighs significantly less. But yeah, it's a 1-person raft. If you think of like a 2-man tent, like let's say a Kelty tent, that's about how big this raft will roll up, and how big it is when it goes on your back.
Well, that's very doable. That's neat.
Uh-huh.
Now, is there a typical size for a crew coming up there, or does it vary? Is there a minimum number of people and those kind of things?
We don't have strict guidelines on a minimum. If you do come up with like 4 or 5 people, we're probably going to work our best to put you with another set of provisionals. And that's something that the program director would do during the year. He'd like search to try and get you hooked up with some other people. But we do have a maximum crew size, and that's 12. The reason for that is because we send 3 guides with you, and there's a 15-person party limit, maybe similar to what you experienced in Northern Tier, where they have like the 3 groups of 8. But just because it's a wilderness area, there's a party size limit of 15. So our maximum size for pack rafting crew is 12. If you want to come up and just trek with us, you don't want to do any rafting, we can send you along with 1 or 2 guides, just depending on the skill level of the guide and the comfortableness of your crew with backpacking and things like that.
Awesome. Now that kind of answers the questions about provisional programs and scouts and leaders and so on, that you kind of have an option that you work that out if you only have, let's say, a couple people from a troop that want to do this. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I've even taken individuals before, and like someone's just sent along their son, and I've put him into a crew. We don't have like individual programs like Philmont does, like with their Ray Auto or OA Trail Crew or something. But we do take provisionals, both provisional groups and provisional scouts.
That's great. That's great. Now, how long is the season up there for you guys? I mean, how long would you go from June to August, or what's the typical season for?
Yeah, so our staff gets up there at probably about like June 10th or 11th, and then we spend about 2 weeks. One of those weeks is in the Bob Marshall. We take a trek with our crew, the whole staff crew, and it's like our staff week. And then we have a week of a pretty intense whitewater course. We go to a professional certifier and do a week of training with them. For the scouts and for people to come and trek with us, we do 5 weeks of program. Usually starts about June 20th, and then that goes till about the end of July. That 5th week is traditionally a trekking only. We just have added that 5th week over the past like 2 years because we're getting a lot more interest in our camp. But the reason we do trekking only for that 5th week is just because the water has gotten kind of low by that time. And we want it to be the best experience for you. So we just have you go out on your feet if you're going to come out on that week. So you're not like dragging your boat in the water or anything like that, right, or dealing with low water in the river.
Exactly. As far as coming up there and getting, maybe reserving, are there weeks that max out on staff going out? I'm sure you only have so many staff going, guides going out with crews. Are there weeks that are just full? Or are they all full? Or what's the makeup of your treks, your weeks?
Yeah, they're usually pretty full. So each slot, like I said, we have 5 slots or 5 weeks. Each of those can take 2 crews per slot. So potentially we're having 10 crews visit our high adventure base per year, or per season. But in each of those weeks, and when you're at the ranch, there will be 1 or 2 crews, depending on how many people have signed up. And then, just depending on how many people have registered, they can be maxed out at 15, or sometimes we take out crews of, 3 guides and 10 participants or something like that.
That's cool. Now, is there a traditional scout camp near MOHAB that, let's say, you had troops that were looking to do a little bit of both, have a crew go your direction and then traditional type programs in another? Is there anything close to that? Just so people will be asking that question.
Totally. Yeah. We've got a couple camps around the state. Montana is a pretty big place.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you define by close, but if you head to the other side of the mountains on the Flathead side of the mountains, the west side of the divide, we've got Melita Island Scout Camp. It's a pretty unique place. It'd be cool if you had somebody from there I'm talking about here too, because that's just as cool as MOHAB.
I have seen that camp in a magazine, so I know which one you're talking about, and that is a cool camp.
Yeah, it's really awesome. It's a scout camp on the western side of the mountains. It's on the Flathead Lake, which is the biggest freshwater body of water west of the Mississippi, like natural body of water. And we have our own island in the middle of this giant crystal clear lake. We do lots of water sports and small boat sailing and water skiing, tubing, stuff like that. We've also got another scout camp called K-Bar-M that's down in the Missouri River region. And their big thing is going on the Missouri River for the Mountain Man Trek. It's a 50-mile canoe trip on the Missouri River. And you actually go on the exact path that Lewis and Clark were going on when they were coming up the Missouri in the Missouri breaks. Then we have another smaller camp called Grizz Base. That's more for like day camp and Boy Scouts and stuff. But the two big like council camp, merit badge, those type of things. That's K-Bar-M Scout Camp and Melita Island.
Okay, that's always a curiosity. Those are things that we look at as in our troop.
Totally.
So, but, what's the cost per person, per crew? How do you guys line that up?
So for trekking, so if you're just going to come up and trek with us, it's $450 per person, and if you're going to go pack rafting, it's $695 a person. That includes all your food in base camp and on the trail. That includes all your accommodations, all the equipment. We provide all the breakfast and dinners on the trail. We provide the shelters, the stoves, all the trekking equipment, stuff like that, everything to do with rafting. You just bring your own personal gear. But yeah, that $695 pays for all that stuff for pack rafting.
Now, is that the same for the trek, or for just trek only? Is that something? I mean, you provide all the tents and
everything except your own personal gear, and then of course it's cheaper because you're not using any of our rafting equipment.
Yeah, exactly. Now, how about let's say backpacks? So you need to come with a backpack, or is that something that you got? Okay.
Yeah, and we don't really have the capacity to rent that stuff out right now. I know, like when you go to Philmont, you can rent a backpack or something, but we're still a small enough operation where we don't have inventory like that. So you got to bring your own personal trekking gear, backpack, clothes, shoes, headlamp, eating utensils, stuff like that. But we do provide all the shelters and stoves and cooking gear and water treatment and emergency communications, all that stuff.
We all know the major high adventure bases around the country, and they offer some awesome programs. Have you been searching for a cool alternative from your typical high adventure trip? As a scout leader, I want to give our scouts some great alternatives. You need to check out highadventurescouting.com. You'll find information on over 30 different council high adventure bases in 24 states. Maybe you're looking for a do-it-yourself option and need some ideas. Maybe you've taken a great trip and you want to share your good fortune with your fellow scouts and scouters. Just send us the details and we'll publish your trip. Whatever your interest, highadventurescouting.com is the one-stop shop for all things high adventure. That's highadventurescouting.com.
Well, that's a big thing. I mean, that's something that I'm always curious about, whether that is provided, and that makes it a little different trek if you're not having to bring your tents and stoves and all that with you. So that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I think that one thing that there's an advantage to that is we go out in that wilderness area so much, and we're in that area so much that we really know the best equipment to use in that area. So when you come up, you can, you don't have to bring your own stuff, and you know that the equipment you're going to be taking out is like specified for that area. So we can get your tents real light and things like that.
Exactly. Now, where does the staff come from? Are they from right around there, or I know you come from quite a ways away, but what's the staff makeup?
Yeah, they're from all over. We've actually only had one staff member from Montana ever. Besides my boss, I guess he's a local, and he works for the Boone and Crockett Club, and is from that area. But yeah, our staff come from all over. Last year we had some people from Missouri, California, Wisconsin, Florida, Montana. We got them from all over.
Well, that's cool. That's cool. How early, if troops want to sign up for either a trek or a pack rafting trip, how early do they have to do that?
I would say you should sign up in the beginning. Like if you're going to sign up for 2020, you'll want to be talking to the program director in like late 2019. So, starting August, September, we normally want to be talking like 8 months out, 10 months out. So we can get you booked, and then we can also, make sure you're really prepared for this trek, both physically, logistically, with equipment, all that stuff. So I'd say about 10 months out, that kind of, probably.
10 months. Okay. Well, that kind of leads me into my next question is, for high adventure trips, my troop is preparing for a trip to Philmont next summer. And the one we should have taken in 2018. And so we're preparing right now. So what kind of preparation do you have to go through for either a trek or a pack rafting trip?
I think for any high adventure base, I've been in scouting since I was pretty young, and have been to Philmont, Northern Tier, Seabay, doing a lot of trekking and walking, and it's going to be really rough terrain. I think it's important that you're at least walking with a backpack at least like once a week, 6 months out, getting out there on the weekends, going for a couple mile hikes, having the stuff you're going to bring in your backpack, having it packed in there and knowing where it's going to go and how it's going to fit. I think that has a huge impact on your trek and your experience. And I think for any high adventure base, you should really be preparing like that. At MOHAB, we actually give you a leader's guide in our information packet, and it actually has a fitness training regimen and plan. So we kind of cover that for you. And it just talks about, hiking with a backpack at least once a week, doing some running or some jogging or some walking, having your shoes broken in, all that stuff. We usually advise like 6 months out, start definitely, if not earlier. I think you can do without that, and I think you could probably get by. And we definitely know people that don't do that. But if you want to have the best experience and feel the best when you're on this once in a lifetime trip, I think it's important to be training well before you come out.
Now, one thing to add on to that, we had a real difficulty preparing for Northern Tier, having the opportunity out on the water, and that was our only difficulty is simulating that. How do you indicate how to prepare for the rafting part of the trip? How do you guys prepare people for that?
Yeah, so that can be tough, because we do at MOHAB we do real whitewater. So we're going to put you in a boat, and you may have not been in a boat that many times, but we do like class 2 rapids. Of course, a lot of that stuff is going to be by choice, and we'll be scouting those out with you, and like giving you the choice to do it. But I think it can be a little bit harder to prepare for that aspect of our program. I think it's really awesome if you can get into a kayak or go out on a lake or a river just to get experience doing that if you never have. But I would say for the rafting portion, the most important thing is that you can swim well, because the water is pretty cold and there's a good chance that you could fall out. So being able to swim well is important. And then if you're just in general overall fitness, I think you'll be just fine with our program, and we can get you through all the boating and anything like that. Just a general overall fitness is really important.
Okay, awesome. Now, we just kind of been talking about things about the high adventure base. What have we left out? I mean, what are some cool things that you'd want somebody to know if you're talking to them about MOHAB?
Yeah, so I think that one thing that people really are most surprised about when they come to our camp is the facilities. They're really excited to go out in the Bob, obviously, but they come to the Boone and Crockett Club's ranch and they're like, man, we don't ever want to leave. This place is incredible. And I think the reason for that is just because of where the property is set. You're in the middle of nowhere. You're in a state that only has 1 million people in it. So when you're up in DePoyer, you really feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. You kind of are. And you get to spend a couple days preparing for your trek on a 6,000 acre ranch, started by a club that was started by Theodore Roosevelt. So there's a lot of cool, interesting history with that. And they're pretty forefront pioneers of wildlife conservation. And I think that is one thing that makes MOHAB really unique, our partnership with the Boone and Crockett Club. They're huge proponents of wildlife conservation in North America, and they're responsible for a lot of our national parks and the Forest Service and a lot of those government organizations. They were started by members of the Boone and Crockett and things like that. So I think a really interesting and enriching experience that you get out of coming to MOHAB is learning about the Boone and Crockett, that organization, and all the things they have to do with wildlife conservation. It's kind of a really unique partnership and interesting thing that you won't get at any other scout camp.
Well, that's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. This podcast is much for me to learn about all these cool high adventure bases, and it's I'm kind of geeking out on all the cool stuff. So, but well, I want to thank you for taking the time today and joining us on the High Adventure Scouting podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Rob, and we look forward to seeing any of our listeners or hearing from people who are listening to this podcast, and we'd love to have you come out to MOHAB.
Awesome. Now I want to thank Stephen Miller, Program Director for the Montana High Adventure Base in Montana, MOHAB, for joining us today. Now you can get more information on their programs at montanahighadventure.com. It's montanahighadventure.com.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to tell your friends about this podcast. You can find us online at highadventurescouting.com, on Facebook or Instagram. If you have any questions or ideas for future podcasts, just email us at info@highadventurescouting.com. This podcast and website are independent and not affiliated with any youth organization. Happy High Adventure! This has been a production of High Adventure Resources, 2018. All rights reserved.